Hi, guys, and happy Wednesday. I'm so excited to be with you guys today to share some tips and tutorials on a couple of common hand sewing stitches. Now, these stitches can be used to enhance your sewing on your sewing machine, and I'm going to share with you the application of those and how to actually do the stitch. So these are actually a couple of the stitches that came on the June tips sheet here. This came in your June box if you're a subscribing Sewing Box member. And today we're going to go over the running stitch, which is also called the basting stitch. And we're also going to talk about the ladder stitch. Now that has a couple other names as well and is actually a really good stitch to know, and you'll find yourself using it in a lot of applications. Okay, but first, before we get into those awesome tutorials, for those of you that are watching on YouTube or on our Facebook page, you can go to sewwhatbox.com/group to join our Facebook group. And there's a bunch of cool sewists in there, and we always get to see cool posts about pictures of finished projects or questions. And we do polls and put funny memes in there as well. So go ahead and go to sewwhatbox.com/group. That will redirect you to the Facebook group page and you can join there. Okay, so first, let's talk about the running stitch. So the running stitch is also called a basting stitch. And if you've been sewing for a while, you've probably heard the term basting stitch in use with your sewing machine. And what a basting stitch or running stitch is just a really long stitch that can be used to hold two pieces of fabric together instead of pins until you can sew it with a normal sewing line. So this is used for times when it's difficult to pin. Maybe it's a curved piece that's going onto a straight piece. If you don't want to try and pin that, you can baste it. So on your sewing machine, you would just make a straight stitch really long, and that would be your basting stitch. These stitches can also be pulled out really easily, so they're not permanent. Um, but the running stitch or basting stitch done by hand with a thread and needle can be used in places that are a little bit more finicky and your sewing machine just won't have the accuracy or patience enough to get this basted. The other thing you can use basting stitches for is to gather, if you use it on your sewing machine or by hand. So I'll show you how to do gathering as I get to that. But here is a picture of the stitch that I'm talking about. You can see that it's basically just what you would normally think of hand sewing. It's an up and down movement with the needle along a line, and there's no going back over itself. One thing to note about this is that this running stitch is designed to come out of your fabric easily. So if you are stitching a seam or something that you don't want to be able to come out easy and you want it to be sturdy, you're not going to want to use this stitch. I can show you in the tutorial what stitch you would want to use because I can just easily show you that. So let's get into me showing you how to do this. And I'm going to switch my camera. Okay, so here we are, and we're going to talk about our running stitch. So I've got my needle and thread here, and I have two pieces of fabric that I'm just going to use to show you guys. Now, what I'm going to do is put these together, and then I'm just going to go into the fabric and go in an up and down motion here. Now, this is a lot like the picture that I showed you. You can kind of see how my needle's just going up and down through here. And then I'm going to pull this. There you can really see it with that blue stitching. So I've just gone up and down. Now, this holds things together from moving, but not super sturdily. So if you want something sturdy, you're going to want to use this to hold it together and then stitch it on your sewing machine, and that will be sturdy. I did mention that I would show you guys how to use this stitch to make gathers. So let me just quickly go all the way across here, and then I will demonstrate that. The cool thing about this stitch is that it's very easy and very fast to do. So it's a good one to practice at first if you've never stitched by hand before. Okay, so in order to gather this up, like if you wanted a gathered skirt or something, all you would do is hold onto this tail so that it doesn't come out. You can tie a knot if you want as well. And then we're just going to push. So I'm pulling on this side. And when I pull on the one side, it makes wrinkles. Because basically what we're doing is we are pulling this thread shorter than the fabric is, and that's just going to bunch this fabric up. So if you were wanting to use this stitch to make gathers, you would do your basting stitch, pull the gathers together, and then hold them like this and run this through your sewing machine. Your normal stitch on your sewing machine is not going to let these move around, so that will keep it from coming back out flat. Now, I also mentioned that I would show you guys a quick trick, like a bonus stitch, if you are trying to hand stitch a seam by hand that you don't want to come out. Because I mentioned that this running stitch is not very sturdy if you are wanting the stitching to not come out. So instead of just going forward through here like this, what we're going to do is we're going to go one stitch. Actually, in order to start, we've got to do two stitches. Okay, so I'll show you what this looks like when my blue comes through. So here it's looking like the start of a running stitch, but instead of continuing forward, I'm going to come backwards and go down here at the end of this stitch that I can see. Then I'm going to come up, double stitch away. So I'm still going to have a gap here. See, I still have a gap, and then I'm going to come back and go through that spot. So basically it's like a little tiny back stitch every time, and I can show you the exact difference here. Let me get a couple more stitches in. The backwards motion is going to be what helps hold this together and make this a little bit more sturdy. And the other thing to note is the smaller that you make your stitches, the more sturdy the fabric is going to be. So, or the seam is going to be. So this on the top here is our running stitch. This is the basting stitch. See how there are gaps in between each stitch? That makes it so that it's easy to come out. So when you're done with the basting stitch, you can just take this out, but that means it's not very sturdy. Now on this side, see how there aren't really gaps? Every stitch is right against each other. That's achieved by doing the backwards motion that I showed you, and that makes this more sturdy and less easy to remove these stitches. Okay, so that is the running stitch. Let's take a look at what the ladder stitch is going to be. Now, the ladder stitch is something that every sewist should know how to do, and usually it's a little intimidating, but I have a couple really awesome tricks that will make it so easy for you. The ladder stitch, let me put up a picture, is also called the slip stitch or an invisible stitch, and that's because once it's done, you cannot see it. This is usually used to sew up a hole in a pillow or a doll or stuffed animal or anything that you sew up and then turn right side out. Usually, if you see an item that needs this type of sewing, like a pillow or something in the store nowadays, if you look closely, they do not use this invisible stitch. Instead, they simply use a sewing machine to top stitch the hole closed. If you have been a sewing club member with us for any time at all and have received any of our pre-cut sewing kits and watched the tutorial videos, you'll notice that we usually have you top stitch these types of holes closed. The reason why we opt for that is one, it's usually easier because you get to use your sewing machine and it's easier for us to teach to beginner sewists. But also, the industry standard nowadays, set by the things that you find in the normal home goods store, is to just top stitch those closed. But this ladder stitch that I'm going to teach you today is going to help you be able to bring a higher level of, not quality, because both are a quality product, either way to finish, but this might give you another option that you can use to finish these types of holes. And if you are ever watching one of our tutorials or anything, and we say to top stitch this closed with your sewing machine, and you prefer to use this invisible ladder stitch, you can always go that route as well. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do that. Again, look at this picture. You can see that it is sewing this hole closed. And I have a thing that I'm going to show you on that I will explain a little bit more. So let me switch cameras again and get to showing you this. Okay, so I'm actually going to use black thread for this one. And first, we need to make sure that we've tied a knot in the end of this thread so that when we start sewing, it doesn't pull through our project, because this, unlike the basting stitch that we just talked about, this is meant to be sturdy and stay in. So here is my little pocket thing that I'm using to show you guys. We can pretend it's a mini little pillow. You can see that there's an opening here. Now, I just turned this right side out, and usually when you turn this right side out through this hole, you will have all these raw edges. And most of the time, people will just push these in and try to do the ladder stitch. Now, that can be kind of hard because you don't really have any lines or anything to go on to make sure that you're leaving this flat. So, trick number one to doing a really good version of the ladder stitch with ease is to iron this flat when you turn this in. So this is going to make this lay flat, and then it's also going to give us these lines that we can follow. Do you see how there's these crisp fold lines? These crisp fold lines will definitely help us know exactly where to put our stitches so that they become invisible when we're done. So I'm going to start by coming over into the corner over here, the edge of this hole. I'm going to come over here. Let me grab my needle. So I'm going to put my needle underneath this flap. So underneath this fold in here, in this corner. I'll show you where it comes out, but it's important to make sure you're under the fold. We're going to come out on the crease line that I made with this iron, out here on the edge of the hole. See, let me see if I have it. You can see this needle coming out right there. That's right on the edge of this hole. So I'm going to pull this out all the way, and my knot should hold. Here you can see a little bit better where I'm coming out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come across. So I'm on this back fold right now. I'm going to come straight across and go straight down in this front hole, the front fold crease line, straight down, right across from where my thread is coming up on this side. Then I'm going to catch a little bit of this fold and make my needle go straight along the inside of this fold for about 1/4 of an inch. And then I'm going to push my needle out right on this fold. So what this does is now you can see a little black stitch all the way on the corner there, and then this comes straight out along this fold. So basically we're doing our stitches along these fold lines. Now I'm going to go directly across from where my thread comes out, so I can pinch this together if I need to see directly where directly across is, and I'm going to go straight down into this fold, along this fold line, and then straight up out of the fold again. And we're just going to continue this process of going back and forth into the fold, along the crease line, and then back out of the fold. Now, the trick with this is to make sure that you're going back into the opposite fold directly across from where your thread came out of the other side. Now, if you do it that way, you won't get any weird bunching or anything. The other trick is to make sure that you're always stitching straight into and straight out of these crease lines. If you're off a little bit on the crease line, where you go in and where you come out, that's how your stitches will be seen. So you can see right here, when I pull this tight, you cannot see any of these stitches. Now I'm going to open it up a little bit and see if I can loosen it up so that you can kind of get a better visual. So here you can see what these stitches look like. See how they kind of go across that opening? If I put it up and down like this, you can see that they kind of look like rungs on a ladder, and that's why this is called a ladder stitch. But once I pull this tight, all of those stitches disappear. So now even if I pull these two edges apart, you can't see any of those stitches. So that is how this is really cool. Now, in order to end, you're going to tie a knot. So take a tiny bit, tiny little stitch right next to where your thread came out last. Like, make your needle go through like 2 or 3 strands of thread in the fabric. We're going to pull this so that it makes a loop, and then stick this needle back through the loop. When you pull tight, that's going to make a knot. Now, in order to make this tail invisible, we're going to go back down into the thread right next to the knot, right next to it. Hold on. And then go a really far way a ways and pull the needle back out. So I'm going to squish this all the way down here. and make the needle come out far away. Maybe. It's easier if there's stuffing in here because the sides don't touch. Okay, so my needle is pointing out really far away down here. You can see that my knot was all the way up here and my thread is coming out down here. Now what you're going to do is pull on this thread to kind of squish this up. Then cut the thread really close to where it comes out of the fabric. And then when this lays back flat, it's going to suck that tail back in so that you don't see any tail of that thread. It's a really easy way to make your knot go away and not have a tail of a thread hanging out. So I hope that you guys learned lots. Today we went over the running stitch and the ladder stitch. If you're just joining us now, you can go back and watch the replay once this live gets over, and then you can learn how to do those two stitches. They're really easy and a good thing to know for your sewing journey. Now, next week on Wednesday, we're going to be going over the other two stitches that were on your insert in your June membership box shipment. And those two are the blanket stitch and the catch stitch. Those two are both stitches that you will probably use quite often once you learn how to use them. And I'm super excited to bring you another tutorial about those next week. Now, if you have any questions, even if you're watching the replay or anything, go ahead and comment them below. I will watch for those comments and answer questions as I can. I was so excited to be here with you guys today and teach you these stitches. And I'm also excited to join you next week where we're going to talk about those other two stitches. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next week.